Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Achates live session on Thursday, 11th of December. Today, we are going to be discussing the use of AI in fundraising. And I think in a cultural sector fundraising landscape that's full of very hot topics, this is possibly one of the hottest. And we want to use our time today to have a frank discussion about the uses and pitfalls of AI and to think about how time-poor fundraising professionals can harness aspects of AI to support income generation efforts without jeopardizing quality or results. My name's Phoebe Walker, and I'm a senior consultant at Achates. I'm joined today by my brilliant colleague, Jacoba Bruneel, who's an Achates consultant. And Achates is a consultancy providing support to cultural organisations with fundraising, recruitment, strategy, organisational change planning, and impact evaluation. We take our name from Greek mythology. Achates was the close friend and loyal advisor to Aeneas, so we think our name quite neatly describes the relationship that we offer to our clients within the cultural sector. Achates Live was set up to really support the sector, bringing fundraisers and other arts professionals together to discuss key topics and also to enable you to help and support each other. And whilst we obviously acknowledge that Achates doesn't necessarily have all the answers, I think that's very important to stress with today's topic particularly, what we absolutely do have is an overview of the sector itself, and we're passionate about using this perspective and role in a supportive way. It's worth saying that all of the information shared in today's conversation is correct at the time of broadcast. So today's session, as I mentioned, will be focused on AI, and my colleague Jacoba will chair a discussion with our two brilliant panelists. And I'm delighted to hand you over to Jacoba to welcome our guests who will be exploring this topic with us today.
Thank you, Phoebe, and welcome everybody. I'm going to start with a few definitions to set the context for our discussion today. So artificial intelligence, or AI, as defined by the American multinational technology company IBM, is technology that enables computers and machines to simulate human learning, comprehension, problem solving, decision-making, creativity, and autonomy. In plain terms, it is technology that can process large amounts of data, identify patterns, and follow detailed instructions about what to do with that information. Essentially, AI tries to replicate how people acquire and use knowledge, but does so much faster. In recent years, the majority of AI breakthroughs, and particularly the increasing use of AI, have focused on the progress in generative AI. And this is the technology that can create original text, images, video, and other content. And it's likely the type of AI a lot of people are most familiar with. It's also where AI's application to and significance for fundraising for both funders and income generation professionals really starts to come into focus. One type of generative AI is large language models, or LLMs, and this is essentially a general purpose AI text generator, which includes models that you'll likely have heard of, such as ChatGPT and Gemini. For income generation professionals, LLMs can help free up time by drafting applications, reports, and communications, and they can help edit and assess texts. And because they are trained on vast amounts of publicly available data, they can support research tasks. Taken in this light, we can see the potential uses of AI as a critical friend, an editor, and a research tool. And used thoughtfully, we can understand how AI may help level the playing fields for small organizations or those with fewer people available to write funding applications. Importantly, AI can also support a range of access needs, for example, by improving readability or offering translation. It is imperative, however, to remember that AI cannot replace human judgment or creativity, which are both crucial components of robust, purpose-led, and effective income generation. Because rather than thinking like a human, an AI recognizes and applies patterns to data, making an informed guess about what should come next. There is also a whole roster of risks and ethical considerations to bear in mind when contemplating the use of AI, from unconscious bias to data protection to environmental impact. And finding the balance between effective use of AI for fundraising while avoiding its pitfalls and many grey areas is a difficult task. We also know that the increased use of AI is contributing to a rapidly evolving and increasingly challenging fundraising landscape, with consequences for all who work and engage, not just with the cultural sector, but the voluntary sector as a whole. So to dig into some of these themes in a bit more detail, I now want to turn to our two panelists for some introductions. We're delighted to be joined today by Helen Cave and Sarah Miguel. Helen Cave has been Executive Administrator for Backstage Trust since early 2020. Previous to that, she worked as the head of events at the Royal Shakespeare Company within their development team for 10 years. Her career has mainly been in the world of fundraising, starting her career with Scope as a community fundraiser, then moving on to the world of overseas challenge events, including hiking, biking, and skiing. Having met Susie Sainsbury when she was on the board at the RSC and running several events with Susie as host, settling at the Backstage Trust is a perfect culmination of a career in fundraising and the performing arts. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Our next guest is Sarah Miguel. She's the Director of Fundraising and Marketing at the LGBT Foundation and serves as a board member at New Economy Organising Network and Manchester Action on Street Health. She is recognised for building donor-centred and marketing-savvy strategies that blend creativity, data and technology. With more than a decade of experience in non-profit fundraising, she has led campaigns that use digital techniques to mobilise supporters to take action while strengthening long-term community engagement with a cause. Sarah is passionate about the use of AI and technology more broadly for social good, previously having spoken on the Tech for Good Live podcast. Sarah is fascinated with the intersection of fundraising, marketing, and emerging technologies and comes keen to offer practical insights into how nonprofits are using AI in fundraising. Hi, Sarah. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So I'd like to kick us off with some questions, some of which I know you'll both have insights on, some of which will be specific to your respective roles as funder and fundraiser. So to start, could I ask you both, what impact are you seeing AI having so far on cultural sector funding and fundraising? And if I may come to you first, Helen.
Yes, of course. In thinking about this question, I think the main response, my number one response, is sheer volume of incoming applications. So I think, just as you've already referenced, the ease with which organisations potentially now can produce applications means that I am receiving triple the amount of applications that I was 2 years ago. Now, I know that performing arts funding is in great demand, and there are many reasons for that. Council funding, NI raises, so there's lots of other things happening on the horizon. But what I'm seeing is a huge increase in the volume of applications from smaller organisations who now can, now have the wherewithal to be able to submit something to us. And the volume is almost now unmanageable. So I am the sole administrator at Backstage Trust and will continue probably to be the sole administrator for now. But my workload has just increased exponentially. And that, I would say, is the number one response to your question. It's just the volume. And there has to be a reason other than organisations needing funding. And I think it's the ease with which people can now go online, find a template, put in their key ingredients that makes them unique, and then present an application. So that would be my number one response to that question.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about the wider context of that as well, and the quality potentially of those bids that you're seeing come in, which add to that workload. But I know we'll come back to that later. So Sarah, how about you? How are you seeing the impact?
So day to day, leading a fundraising team, we're seeing an impact in how efficient we can be, how we can use AI tools to kind of complete quick tasks, never just as they are. And so if we use Copilot or ChatGPT, we would never just take what it spits out as the answer. It can be the starting point, or it can help you meet a text limit. It can help you analyze big volumes of data and make predictions much quicker than we'd be able to if we did that without AI. But I'm also seeing in recruitment that we're seeing job applications written with AI and not high quality job applications. I'm sure the same is true in terms of grant applications. And so there are challenges we've had and lots of ethical concerns come up too. So we've got an AI policy in my organisation, and I'd encourage everybody to have one.
Absolutely. I think that's one of our main concepts. We released a few weeks ago an AI masterclass on Achates community, which was one of the main things that came out of the work we've been doing with clients is the need to have a policy that really articulates how you want to use AI and when to use AI. Thinking back about the ethical considerations that we'll speak about later on as well. So Sarah, you mentioned how you're using AI saves time for you and this is more efficient. So can you talk a little bit more about where you feel that AI can bring that additional value for income generation professionals?
Yeah, I'll give a few examples of the ways in which I've been using AI. In a previous role, we had a kind of a large customer base. You might have a large audience base, a lot of data set on a CRM. I used a machine learning tool that plugged into our CRM and made predictions about the people most likely to leave a legacy, most likely to become a regular donor, and most likely to give a major gift. And it really narrowed down who we should be targeting our kind of prospecting and engagement work on. And very, very accurately, it was able to make predictions based on people's names in terms of what their gender is likely to be and their age is likely to be. So using data points that we didn't have in our system to make more accurate predictions than we could. So that was great and very sophisticated, but not free. What is free is ChatGPT or Copilot, and we use that very frequently for either starting some draft text copy to get us going. So, for example, I'm writing a theory of transformation. The very first draft is a nice structure set out by machine learning, but I'm then changing that to suit the organization. It does spill out lots of Americanisms and formatting that I don't particularly love. So it is always just a first draft for me. Once we've drafted an application, often it's a challenge to hit the kind of text limit that you've got in applications. So giving it something that's double the length and saying, condense this into 300 words, it does that very well. But again, always check the copy that it gives you. And then what we've done recently, we were thinking about what social media audience to target for an ad campaign for a fundraising appeal. And so we were looking for LGBTQ people across the UK. And so we asked it to look at the census data and other data sets in terms of where people are likely to have kind of philanthropic intentions, also have money, and be more likely to be LGBTQ. So it gave us very exact destinations where we can target those locations, and just saves a huge amount of time and us having to undertake that research, which could take a day, 2 days.
And was that bit of research done with a free tool as well, like ChatGPT, or did you?
Yeah. That was Copilot.
Brilliant. I think what you mentioned about that constant editing whenever you're using AI generated content is really important. And again, something I'm sure we'll come back to, but it's so important to make sure that it has your own voice and the correct data and it's not producing hallucinations. Helen, you already... Oh, sorry.
Lots of people tuning in might not be using AI as actively. And if you would like to, start small and test. But I would say that even though you think you might not be, you probably are. So lots of us are using AI. It's the first kind of answer that a Google search will give you through generative search. If you're using Canva as like a design tool to remove a background or crop an image using Smart Crop, that's also AI. And so the fear of I don't know how to use it, you probably already are.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, you also mentioned that you're seeing lots of smaller organizations who now are able to apply to the Backstage Trust. Are there any other ways in which you've seen that AI is adding value for income generation professionals?
I didn't think your question was going to be adding value there, so I was going to do a negative.
Oh, I see. But no, you can answer that how you like.
To come to Sarah's point, and Sarah obviously is very good at her job and obviously uses AI in a very effective way, but then ensures that the content of an application, which is obviously my world, would be absolutely tailored to Backstage Trust. But I've seen some hilarious, applications where they've obviously forgotten to actually change the name of the trust that they're applying to. So, there's a certain amount of cut and paste with the whole AI world that I can see happening. And I can almost, I think, recognize an AI format visually. same topper, same colors of ink formatting, you know, and I just think that looks far too like that one. And they're different ends of the country, different areas of performing arts. So there's definitely there's some people nowhere near as sophisticated as Sarah who are really churning out the templates and just putting in the words. And they are the flavor of those applications is often very bland, can be very statistics based, but there's no passion and there's no sweet, beautiful stories. Susie and I love the sweet, beautiful stories about how the sound desk failed and they had to use the local scouts to be the literal physical cues for a show that the Mac Robert Art Centre were doing. And the story was so beautiful and so sweet and so gorgeous. We gave them the funding. And I think sometimes the AI chat GPT can be a little bit sterilized. And that's where obviously Sarah does a very good job of then going in and going, oh, this sounds far too clinical. But a lot of people maybe who aren't as experienced, it's very dry, it's very bland, it's very numbers driven and passionless. And because of the volume, we're having to be a lot stricter about who we say yes to. And it's the ones that have the passion and the stories that actually are getting to the top. So it can be written well from an English perspective, but it's just the beauty and the passion is that a lot of them are devoid of that, and so that they get rejected for that reason. It's very interesting. And about to come back to your point a little bit, I was thinking about so the questions that you asked us to think about ahead of this conversation very brilliantly. I was thinking about the word artificial and how we often, particularly my generation, I'm in my 50s, use the word artificial as a derogatory term. So you think artificial plants, oh, not as good as the real thing. Artificial intelligence, not as good as the real thing. And we approach it perhaps from a negative perspective, but actually it's brilliant, isn't it? That's the thing. We're looking at artificial intelligence going, it's not as good as the real thing, but actually it nearly is. And to Sarah's point, it's so sophisticated and it's so clever that I don't for a minute blame, in inverted commas, anyone for using it when it's absolutely such a brilliant tool. So when it comes to us being a funder, there is absolutely no judgment on anybody who uses AI to create an application, because obviously the smaller organizations, youth theatre up in Aberdeen that's run by a working parent who is a full-time carer for their elder, you know, whatever their situation, but suddenly can find an hour of an evening to suddenly put an application together for the local youth theatre that they run. Why shouldn't they? Good on them. So I hope that even though I'm saying there's an amount that the volume is awful, there's a lot of blandness out there, there's certainly no judgment from me. Because previously, if you're an organisation that can afford a development team, fantastic. But if you're a youth theatre, you know, wherever, and but a full-time person, then use ChatGPT, use AI, use all the tools at your disposal. We won't judge you for that, but as long as the passion is there, that's what we're looking for. But it's very difficult as a funder to wheedle those out because of the volume, and that's where it's hard for me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really interesting what you said about the personal stories, because it's exactly that. I think where we've seen an increase in, for instance, draft applications we receive back from clients is that first draft made with AI, and it sounds like on the first read it will sound very smooth, but then when you dig into it, it's missing the personal stories, it's missing the specificity, the detail of why they're doing what they're doing, how they're doing it a lot of the time as well. So it's really digging through and helping those details. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do when we're working with clients who are using AI. How we're trying to support clients is to come back to this amazing work you're doing and bring that back into the bid. And you can use, like you say, the structure that AI gives you, but bring the like put the meat on the bones.
Yeah. I think sometimes people don't think of funders as human beings. You know, we are Backstage Trust, but it's me, it's Helen, living in Stratford upon Avon, reading your application from my kitchen table. I'm a mum. So the passion speaks through the pages to a human being, because I am not AI. And one day maybe my job, and maybe we'll come on to this, will be done by an AI bot. But for now, it's me, and I'm human, and I'm sentient, and those are the stories that we love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of viewers will be relieved to hear that there is no immediate no on the AI front, and
Not yet, not
not
yet.
yet. No, exactly. But from what you just said, am I right to understand that you're not using AI at the moment to sift through any applications? No.
Not at all. No, it's still me reading through them all and speaking with Susie about them and our trustees. So yeah, no, it's all done. It's all done with the humans.
Fantastic. Sarah, you've touched about this on this a little bit, but what beyond writing funding bits would you say are the big applications of AI in fundraising, and what do you think are the strengths and pitfalls of those? Yeah.
So I'd say it's not just funding bids, that's only a part of what fundraisers write. There's
Exactly.
the copy for the appeals, there's a whole kind of email automation journey, newsletter, etc. It can be a helpful tool for all of those, but it can't replace the human element, the passion that we're talking about. And I would say that that just speeds things up and allows us to churn through more. One of the ways that I've seen it be really useful is for people whose first language isn't English or who have dyslexia, who are autistic. It can really help as an access tool. And I think that's fantastic to see. It's like a free access tool that really is leveling the playing field. But I've also seen first-time fundraisers lean too heavily on AI, and that means that they're not developing that like strong writing skill. And I don't think the need for that strong writing skill from a human is going to go away. I think it's really important to build your own skill set and not learn to become dependent on AI, even though it will still be there, because it's that personal edge that you can give. So for kind of the bridge between fundraising and marketing, I think the use of AI has been really useful in thinking about our social media content, maybe developing, like removing backgrounds and things like that. The use when compared to photoshopping, that's a huge saving in time. We're pretty much agreed we wouldn't use it for image generation because of the kind of concerns around creatives, artists, and not paying fairly. But I have used AI for kind of image generation in a previous job where we had vulnerable clients that we wouldn't want to photograph, but still needed to demonstrate in a fundraising capacity, bringing to life this incredible scene, etc. And that allows us to do that safely. So I think there's lots of different applications. I've also used it to draft policies that I need to do. Give me that first template, the strategy, tell me what to put in there, just the structure of things. I think what can be difficult is getting started, and AI is a really useful tool for that.
And then you also mentioned before that you used it obviously to analyze data, and then you had this plugin tool, and that was paid for. Can you tell us a little bit more? Obviously, that sounds really nice, but I guess it all comes back then you need to have like the proper data to work from. I imagine you have a very tidy database. Is that correct, or how would you say?
Yeah, so it was a previous role where I had a much bigger kind of donor base, and there was a minimum. I think they needed 50,000 records for us to sign up because it really relies on that volume of the data set. So my current organisation, we're not there yet and ready to use that tech. But compared to maybe 16 points of data that we would collect from like the name, email, address, amount, etc., the predictions it was able to make based on their location, based on their name, based on whether they use an AOL or Gmail email, allowed it to predict many more things than we could. And what was incredible was to see that it was working. So it would give us 20 people to target as potential to become regular donors. We human one-to-one approached those people and could see that they were converting much more than our previous attempts. So it was, an interesting kind of experiment. It was expensive, but it saved us a lot of time in prospecting.
Yeah, that's great. It's also making me think about having that data that you're working from. So obviously, when we work with AI, it's only ever as good as the information you put in, isn't it? So that is true for when you're analyzing your database, but it's also about when you're using it to write funding applications or copy. I imagine you need to make sure that you have your case for support nailed down and you know who your audiences are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we're using in my organization, if you go for the kind of paid version on Copilot, we have closed it off so that it can't share our information externally, but it will keep it and kind of learn from the information that we're feeding. And we've done that because we've got vulnerable service user data that we would not want it to have any kind of external sharing of. But that means it can pull up upon things like census or deprivation data, but also all of our SharePoint files. So when we look at the sources that it's using, we can see it's pulled from external and our own sources. So research that we've produced but never published.
Yeah.
And that gives it kind of a much richer output, especially in terms of tone. So if it's got 20 previous funding bids you've worked on, it can learn your tone and replicate that much more accurately.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's great. Thank you. So as a fundraiser, so if you were to speak to a fundraiser who's never or rarely used AI before, what do you think are the 3 key things that you think they should know before they use it, Sarah?
My first one would be like make sure that you've got approval from AI use in your organization. Is there a need for that policy? I think we'll get on to the ethics of AI, but it is certainly cloudy and it's useful to have that line in the sand in terms of we would use it for this, but not this, and here's what we would share and not share. In terms of, can you repeat the question?
Oh, just the 3 key things when we're talking about AI.
I would say start small as well, so it can feel really intimidating. Lots of people, lots of talk around AI now. Rather than maybe diving into a funding bid, start with an email to donors. See what your Christmas email to donors looks like through one of these search engines. Tweak it to make it sound like you. That can be like a nice small step is testing out how it will write an email from you. And then a third point, I think that the kind of data side of things is underrated. So if, for example, you're working in an area of deprivation and you're trying to answer a question about what the need is for this activity, ask it like, what is the evidence of need in my area for this kind of activity? And it will pull kind of quite concrete data sets that you can reference externally from trusted data sources. And it is important to look at the data sources that these search engines have used and check whether you're happy with them. It's not always correct what it will put in. There are times when it will lie. So check the original data sources too. I think there's something also around knowing where you sit in terms of adopting technology broadly and adopting change, and whether your kind of process of change acceptance is more reluctant or an early adopter. And how can you kind of get yourself a mentor or have support to work through whatever your approach is to change, because this change is coming, it's here. And so if you're not adopting AI yet, that's fine, but there will be a point when you will be and will need to. And so getting ready for that journey and the support you might need, I think, is also important.
Yeah, that's really great advice. So we've touched about it on it, I think, in some of the answers already. But yes, those wider ethical considerations around use of AI in fundraising. But I guess that's just broader use of AI. Would you like to speak to that, Sarah?
Yes, I mean, it's where to begin. One of the big concerns that came up when we first started looking at our policy was environmental. There is no denying that the water use it takes and the environmental impact of every single generative search is having a negative impact. My view is that, like, don't just use it if you're not planning to use the output. Don't use it to decide what you're going to have for dinner. Use it for important stuff where the impact's going to be worth it. I think there's also concerns around the replacement of creatives. So it can write music, it can create images, it could replace photography, etc. It's really important that we draw our boundaries around that in terms of where we're prepared to use it in an image or video sense. I think that there's concerns around it replacing jobs. That's not what I've seen so far, but I think it's getting better all the time. It will never be able to replace that human, sentient, passionate part. So there will always be jobs for fundraisers to add that bit in. But I would say that economically, we are going to come to a point where lots of jobs in our current economy are replaced. I don't think that will leave a vacant gap of mass unemployment. I think it creates new jobs, new opportunities, and that with those opportunities, it's going to be important to be savvy about how you're using and working with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, I also wanted to come to you about this again, because obviously you've mentioned the impact you felt as a funder in the flood of applications, and we know that this the trust and foundation climate is incredibly challenging. There's lots of pressure on funders, lots of funders closing. So do you feel like AI is playing a very active role in that?
Yes, I do. I do, definitely. I mean, to the earlier point, there are obvious reasons why we're getting more applications, financial reasons to do with the economy. But definitely it's those smaller ones. I mean, I can tell from the applications that we're receiving that these are potentially organizations that have looked us up probably through an AI portal of what we fund, because we publish our giving data on 360 Giving. And so it's very easy to use a tool like that to work out what Backstage supports. And what I see that's quite interesting, which you can do as a human, to be fair, but I'm sure AI speeds it up, is, for example, we support a singing medicine initiative in Birmingham Hospital, which is a wonderful program where singers go into hospices and children's hospital units and sing with the children who are, undergoing treatment. And it's so lovely for their families, and it's got, proven. It's proven to have helped those children through difficult times. Anyway, as a consequence of that grant giving, we then get a flurry from other hospices and other similar organisations. Again, very sensible. That's how fundraising works. You look at what people fund and you follow suit. So no blame again, but the volume, then we see them flurry in, and it's very interesting because that's quite a specific type of performing arts. You might argue that it's almost quite a sideline, but we loved the project. It was beautiful. We funded it, and then we get the flurry. And that, I presume, is, like Sarah's saying, savvy fundraisers going, right, let's put, what does you can probably, I've never tried it, maybe I will after this conversation, put into AI, what do Backstage Trust support? And perhaps it'll be really a real good eye opener for me, because it'll show, where we've given support and therefore what we might fund similarly. So it's those flurries as well that we get, which we just didn't used to get that kind of following suit, but now we get it. And I think it's just easier, isn't it, for people to find out exactly what we've done in the past.
Absolutely. Do you feel on the flip side of that as well, that there are lots of people who might be submitting an application just because they can and they have the capacity now, but they haven't not actually looked at what it is you fund, but they've just used AI to send something out? Is that
100%. Absolutely, 100%. I've got, as well as the increase in relevant applications, there's been an increase in non-relevant ones that have obviously failed to look at performing arts being our actual key, set of criteria. So yes, I have had a flurry of potentially ones that, it's just slightly connected. So medical ones, hospices, but not looking at the fact that it was a performing arts initiative within a hospice setting. So they've obviously picked up hospice and gone, great. And then I get 10 hospice applications, which aren't relevant. So yes, definitely. I think that's sort of churning out of non-relevant applications, which of course also we don't ignore those. We will respond and say, actually, you don't fit with our criteria, but that's another half day spent responding to things that aren't even relevant. I mean, perhaps that will have to stop. Those are the kind of lovely tasks that perhaps we'll have to stop, and I'll just put them in the shredder and they'll never hear from us. But we don't work like that. But perhaps we will have to be a bit more savvy on things like that.
Quite a number of years ago, I remember thinking, I was working in grant making for a little while, and I remember thinking of all these brilliant organisations that are applying, we're only going to fund a percentage of them. And I really think about, like, en masse, the charitable time that is spent on applying for grants compared to the success rate, especially now, just doesn't make sense. And back then I thought, what if the funders had to proactively seek out who and what they were going to fund rather than it being the opposite way around?
Yeah.
And what if
Yeah.
instead, as a charity, I can just say, please take a look at us, here's our name and contact details, and that the work is reversed. I think that the volume now might prompt movement in that direction. Not
I
that I
think,
want to see more like expression of interest only applications, but
no, I think you're absolutely right, Sarah. And it's one of the things that we are discussing. So our approval rate when I started in 2020 was about 50-50. And now I just did my maths and it's about 30%, which probably actually is still quite high, I think, compared with other funders, but
Yeah.
it's hugely reduced and it's only reducing.
Yeah.
And so, yes, to your point, how long can I continue, if it continues to increase, to actually process all those applications? Because I do read everyone that meets the criteria is read, is discussed, is thought about, is considered, and then is either accepted or rejected. So it's a lot of volume, it's a lot of work. And so, yes, to your point, Sarah, at what point do we go, enough already? We just can't continue. If that doubles again, I can't do it. We can't do it. And so will we ever, because it's not how we work, but will we be sort of almost forced to do the sort of expression of interest or, where we already know you type of support? And it's disappointing what Sarah says about just people not applying to trusts and foundations because they've almost given up because the hit rate is so low. But I absolutely acknowledge what she's saying. I am also in my other life trustee of a local hospice, and I see it from their side. Absolutely, that the success rate is so low.
Yeah. It's exactly that. And I think we're seeing it across the sector with lots of funders making that move to invite only to expressions of interest or narrowing the eligibility criteria to very, very specific causes. And I
what
think
I think would be like a beautiful middle ground, if any large funder could do this, is set up a platform where a charity uploads their project proposal or their core funding proposal, and that funders can review those and seek them out and use the search function, etc. So they're all writing one application, and that's what gets picked up by funders. I feel it would save time on both sides.
Yeah.
Just to come on that, I think there are a couple of mechanisms, not kind of wholesale, but that are from some funders that are attempting to work in that way, possibly, or kind of have a mechanism where there's a kind of notice board for succinct projects that are then maybe picked up, and sometimes that's through trust and foundation support, sometimes it's individual philanthropists. I think those kind of things have been there here and there. They're not quite working in the way that you describe, Sarah, but I agree. I think kind of perhaps portals or mechanisms that work a bit more like that can be, as you say, a bit of a middle ground for things like this, where there's kind of, I suppose, equity in the way that labour is distributed as well. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think in the meantime, as a fundraising using AI, it's about doing that due diligence and checking that the funder would actually be interested in your project and not just submitting an application because you can. I think that'll be really important to not add to the pressure on the on the system as a whole, I think. Let's move on to our next question, which is about, so there's an argument that AI may help level the playing field for applicants who are less experienced bid writers, but do you both think that's true, or do you think it's still really mainly advantages experienced but time poor fundraisers, thinking about those conversations we had about editing and the case for support you need? Helen, could I come to you, please?
No, I absolutely think it's not necessarily organisations with development teams with time poor fundraisers. And I've worked at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I know what it's like to work in a very busy development department. I think it is, what I'm seeing definitely is the organisations who are charitable, who don't have a fundraiser. And that's the increase that I am seeing. It's from those organisations or schools, or yes, I think it's those organisations where they don't have a development team, they don't have a fundraiser, but suddenly they have this tool at their fingertips where they can literally put a bid together during their tea time and get it to me the next day. Doesn't mean it's good, but they can sort of, feel rude saying it, but sort of churn them out. That's how I feel. There's a lot of, oh, well, we can now because I can just put what we need and put it through an AI filter, and then send it to Helen in the morning. So I definitely am seeing that. And I think that's the biggest change that I'm seeing. I have absolutely no doubt that a savvy development team would use it, as Sarah has done very efficiently. And my daughter's 25, she uses it regularly. She'll write something and then she'll run it through the AI filter to improve it, and it improves it. I get that. So, but the change I'm seeing is in the volume from the smaller organizations who are using it as an efficient tool, and why wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
I definitely think it can level the playing field. And I think, like workshops and webinars like this to explain how to tactfully use AI rather than just fumble your way through are really important. I've mentioned that people who speak English as a second language are really benefiting. But I also think there's a class and educational piece here, which is so crucial for the arts and cultural sector around you not needing to be degree educated and need to write to this certain standard, which is another way in which it can level the playing field. It makes it fiercely competitive for all of us.
Yeah.
To come in and again, because it's something, well, we've all been thinking about, and I've been thinking about how, just I suppose this point about is it advantaging, the people and the teams who already have a certain level of advantage, have that, a degree level education, have resource, have kind of a particular level of writing skill or whatever, and is the advantage more to them in terms of a time efficiency rather than it advantaging people who are, not in that same bracket of advantage. And in that case, or in that sense of things, it's hard to see maybe where the leveling comes in, or where the kind of equity argument comes in. And I suppose, I think of kind of that system of a certain type of privilege leading to a certain type of education facility with writing, language, communication, whatever. It's another kind of, system that information is funneled through that leads to a certain result. It's not a comparator, but in, an adjacent to how AI is a system that achieves something similar. So I sometimes, I think, struggle with that argument about the level playing field, because I know far less about it, of course, than you, Sarah, but I sometimes struggle to think that, or struggle to see maybe that's the advantage is coming to the people who, really need to benefit from that advantage.
Yeah. I'm kind of yet to see it in terms of the kind of leveling the class field, but I do work with refugee-led organisations where English is a second language, where they don't know how to write in the kind of British acceptable way, not least in the formal grant application way, where it is that proper step up in a way that they haven't had before. I would say that to really make those applications successful, they then ideally need a volunteer or a kind of native speaker to then check that, because what we're getting spilled out is this over Americanized, pretty boring read.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Sarah. I think that's fantastic. We work with a number of charitable organisations that don't have English as their first language, and I think that's absolutely fantastic that they are then able to use those tools. But and I think actually at Backstage we never were snobby about the level of English within an application. It didn't need to be the most beautifully written piece of text, but what it does need to be is passionate. And so I think even before AI was really even talked about, we were about the passion. And sometimes the writing could be a bit clunky, but we didn't used to ever mark people down for that, because if they're a brilliant youth theatre practitioner, then let's have them working with the kids in their area. Does it matter that they can't, write at a degree level? No, it doesn't. It matters about the passion. So I absolutely agree. Leveling the playing field in that way is fantastic, that it's enabling more people to apply to us that maybe wouldn't have dared, perhaps, or didn't have the confidence. Maybe that's where it is leveling that playing field a little bit. But at the same time, we never really were snobby about that. I don't know a better term to give it, but
Yeah,
yeah.
great. It's great to hear that the impact is that it is benefiting those organizations that can most need it from where you're sitting. That's fantastic. Kind of a short question, really. What will you think become standard expectations for good bid hygiene and transparency regarding use of AI in funding proposals? Helen, if I could come to you really.
Yes, I'm very happy for you to come to me, but I think that's almost impossible for me to answer. I have thought about this question because even if every application I received, I could run through a system which said this was created 99% by AI. Do I then mark that person down because they've used a tool at their disposal? To Sarah's point, maybe English isn't their first language. Maybe they, are not great at English, or maybe they're just not very good at writing. That's fine. That's not what we are looking for. We're not looking for the degree level bid writer. We're looking for the projects that are actually going to have an impact around the UK. That's what we're looking for. So even if I could identify where AI has been used to a high level, I don't know that we would change our policy, because why wheedle those ones out? Because I wouldn't, to earlier points, good on you if you've used it and you've used it well, but you've still tailored it and you've still spoken with passion and you're treating the reader of your application, me, as a sentient human being, then go ahead. So we don't have an AI policy. We may need to introduce one in the future, but I'm not sure what that would look like for us at the moment.
I think for me, having worked on with clients on AI supported bids and having played around with it myself, I would say it's almost ultimately the good kind of practice, the good bid hygiene comes down to just making sure you have your case for support, you know what the need is, you know how you're addressing it, and like you say, you bring it to life with the case studies and the stories from people so that it sounds like you and make sure it has your voice as an organization. So I think, yeah, I feel like that's probably what was going to continue to be the most important. Yeah.
I've seen from the flip side in terms of applying to different funders that we're starting to get more and more statements about their individual positions on the use of AI. Those vary, but tend to be you can use, but not completely an AI written bid, please. I think probably the grant sector needs to look at what the kind of higher education sector's doing, because it's like causing havoc for plagiarism and essay writing, etc. So I'll be interested to see where they land on sussing out what AI has been used, how to use it well. Yeah, I think they're probably a bit of ahead of the curve and have more resource than grant making.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, and it brings me to the last question actually, which is what do you think are the wider implications of feeding? So when we've talked about when you write a bid and you need the good information, so you talked about having all of your SharePoint files available for AI to draw on. So what are the potential wider implications of feeding all of that organizational and project context into AI processes? Sarah.
So I think that there's you can't ignore the kind of ethical conundrum of the impact that each search makes. But I listened to a really interesting talk around marginalized identities. And if the machines are not learning about those identities, they simply won't be able to reflect and talk about them well. And so the LGBTQ community, even though there's like a concern and aversion of how AI is going to reflect us and understand gender identities, etc., if LGBTQ people don't use these search engines, they're not going to learn about identities and pronouns. And so it takes us feeding the beast in order for it to get better. And I think that on a broader scale means that if more progressive leaning people are more overt and cautious around AI, then it could default to being slightly right leaning. So I have a caution around like the blanket no use, because what will it end up becoming if we don't use it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point to make when we think about how there's already this unconscious bias because it's trained on all the data we have through history created, that all of these unconscious biases in society have been translated into AI and it reproduces that. So it's really interesting that you say that, and it's kind of necessary for us to feed in the information that would balance that out again. Yeah.
I also often look to the business world in terms of like what are businesses doing with AI, and therefore what can charities and cultural organisations take and choose to not take as well. And one of the very big kind of fast rising things is generative search. And so whilst the focus has been on search engine optimization, SEO, and getting your ranking discoverable, at the moment people's websites aren't being clicked through to nearly as much. And so, but you can develop strategies to make sure that you're feeding the machine so that the answers are still involving your content. It gets a little sophisticated in that area, and we're at the very beginning of that journey because businesses are as well. But search is changing, and therefore, how are people going to know about your shows, your tour, your museum, etc.?
Great. I think that's a really positive note to end on in terms of like, yes, do use AI and use it well. So I will hand back to Phoebe now for final words.
Thanks, Yakola. Thank you so much for that wonderful sharing. And thank you so much, Helen. Thank you, Sarah, for that really, really thought-provoking discussion. It's a conversation that feels hugely important. I'm really glad we've been able to have it. I know we're going to be continuing to have that conversation in various guises over the coming while. And it's something I know it's really important to keep live and to keep kind of talking about in our sector and the wider sector as we've talked about. So I think it just remains for me to say, from our perspective at Achates, we're offering a range of services to help you get the most out of your fundraising. As Jacoba's talked about, we've been working with various organisations who are thinking about, their AI journey and how that feeds into their fundraising as well. On our Achates community platform, which is our digital platform where you can access webinars and masterclasses and purpose-designed tools and resources to support your income generation. We do have some new modules that have been released around use of AI in fundraising and the considerations you need to make. So do have a look at that platform if you're interested in kind of finding out more about that. You can also, if you want to discuss anything you've heard today with a member of our team, you can drop us a line, info@achates.org.uk. We're always really happy to have a chat, hear about how you're grappling with AI and other challenges as well, of course. Just to note as well, finally, our next Achates Live will be broadcast in February. There'll be more details to follow on that soon, so please do keep an eye on your inbox. And it just remains for me to say again, thank you so much to Sarah and to Helen for joining us. Thank you to everyone for joining us and watching this session. And we look forward to seeing you back with us again in the new year. Bye for now.